Hello, and welcome to Fallout Leftovers Part 2. Part 1 is in the description as well as the end slate, and there should also be a card here, I guess. I recommend listening to it. I also recommend watching Fallout in Analysis first, because that contains a lot of important context and a lot of things that won't get talked about here, because this is the leftovers for Fallout in Analysis. Let me begin by mentioning that yes, most of these are recorded while I'm driving. A lot of them aren't, but a lot of them are. These were recorded spontaneously throughout my day, and sometimes that meant recording them while driving. Sorry, that's how it goes. There is no script. I'm kind of just winging it. I hope you enjoy. This is Fallout Leftovers, and I thought I had recorded all of them. I had assembled a sort of look at what the Leftovers video for viewers and the one for patrons was going to look like. I thought I had everything I'd need. And then I realized that there were actually two very important topics that I did not talk about in either. So I do kind of need to kind of clear the air a bit and talk about two rather important things. This segment in particular will be about Gestalts. I did a decent job explaining Gestalts. I didn't do a good job at kind of explaining how they relate to the West Coast and the East Coast game design-wise. I guess rather, moreover, the shift from isometric RPG to real-time action game, because there is a very big difference. So, Gestalt-wise, I kind of talk about you kind of have to treat Fallout like a Survivor situation. Didn't explain that well. I would say that there were some people confused in the comments, but frankly, at this point, the video's got like 1,200 views. And it's been out for 2 weeks. 15 days. What I mean by that is that in most encounters, you kind of use up most of your resources in major encounters. And you don't have much left at the end of them. You know, you don't get a lot of ammunition, you don't get a lot of, medical supplies, first aid kits, and stim packs. And what you do have, ammo-wise especially, you can use up very quickly because it's very easy to miss. What this leads to is gameplay that is best described as roller coaster-esque. You build up supplies, going through different towns and completing smaller, sequences, and then you kind of use that all in one big encounter. Like when you fight the giant mole rats in what is that, Vault 15? In like that bottom section of Vault 15 after you get the rope. That's kind of the first big encounter. And when I played it, I used up all of my ammo. I only had a melee weapon left, and I used up my last first aid kit. I only had like 1 or 2 stim packs left. But if I had continued playing Fallout 1, I would have, gone back to Shady Sands, done some odd jobs there, built up enough capital to then cash that in for more bullets, for more first aid kits, for more stim packs, maybe a better melee weapon, or some armor. And then you kind of do that sequence over again. Fallout 2 is very much the same way, just now there's a bunch of additional tiers. What was the best weapon in Fallout 1 can now be outclassed. I believe I want to say there's a light machine gun or some sort of heavy automatic rifle in Fallout 1. There might even be the Bozar in Fallout 1. I didn't do the most research on Fallout 1. But in Fallout 2, you have the Pancord Jackhammer. You have the G11. You have the Bozar. You have quite a varied arsenal for, dealing with those higher tier parts of the game. Those later segments. Fallout 3, though, is radically different. It's very easy to stockpile weapons, ammo, supplies. And I think, the best example of this is the barter menu. When you talk to an NPC, you can barter with almost anybody. But they only have a few odds and ends on them. So if you want to do, a full restock, you have to talk to a ton of people. Fallout 3, shopkeepers are much more spread out across the map. There's one in most major settlements, but their inventory is immense. They might not have a lot of caps, but they've just got tons of junk for you to purchase or trade. New Vegas even kind of falls into that same trap. When you play Fallout New Vegas, when I ended New Vegas, I had, hundreds and hundreds of 10mm rounds. I had rockets and missiles I was never going to use. I had a whole bunch of mini nukes, and that's really the big thing. Bethesda's Fallout introduced the Fat Man. I believe there was a rocket launcher in Fallout 1 or 2, but I might be misremembering. I might be misremembering or attributing a false memory here. I could have sworn there was some sort of missile launcher in one of those games. Probably Fallout 2. Fallouts 1 and 2 had some high damage single target weapons, but they were expensive. They were a chore to keep topped up. And again, there wasn't, a guarantee of, hitting and killing your target with it. The Fat Man is pretty much an instant win button to any encounter you don't want to deal with. It does tons of damage. If you miss, its splash radius is huge. So you can just suck up an entire street. Or an entire indoor space, a whole room full of enemies in one go. Fallout 3 hands out mini nukes like candy. If you're running low, you can just go to a shop and buy more. They're not terribly expensive. If you're not taking chems or drinking alcohol, sell your wines, sell your spirits, sell, your mentats, and I even sold Rad-X and Radaway. I wasn't hurting on Rad-X and Radaway. I had plenty. And if you're playing New Vegas, you can, New Vegas has the same problem too. You can sell the thin red paste and the blood sausages. You get a ton of those, and they're worth 100 caps each. So, that's an easy way to build you a cushion of 4,000 or 5,000 caps that you can then trade in to the gun runners for a ton of mini nukes. I never had to use a mini nuke in either game, I'll be completely honest. But, it's very, very easy to build that stockpile. And in all the games, you will be swimming in caps. Some of the saves I used for Fallouts 1 and 2, even late into the, not even late into the game, probably 40, 50, 60% of the way through, they had 20,000 caps, or $20,000. New Vegas. The last time I did a Tale of Two Wastelands run of both games, I had over 200,000 caps at one point. It's very easy to sneak the gold away in Dead Money. Somebody even told me that you can literally just sneak the gold out bit by bit before, that final encounter. And, the climactic, get out of there before it explodes or whatever, finish. And right there, that is over 250,000 caps. That's actually closer to, if I'm doing the math right, yeah, that is closer to 500,000 caps. Just a downright ridiculous number. And, and with that, Fallout 4, doesn't help. In fact, Fallout 4 is arguably even worse in that regard. It's very easy to turn junk into things, and those things into money, and that money into more junk to build more things. You can buy whole boxes of screws and springs. You can buy, an entire pallet of concrete and have it delivered to a settlement. You have that sort of stuff. You can turn your tin cans into thousands of units of steel, and then you can turn that steel into guns. And, it's very easy to build the surplus of anything in Fallout 4. And during all of the game's boss encounters, it conveniently hands you either a Fat Man and a single mini nuke in that room, Both Kellogg and the Synth Courser do that. Though the Synth Courser can survive a mini nuke. So you might want to follow that up with some extra bullets. And then the Mirelurk Queen, if you're playing for the Minutemen, that's like your only other boss fight. And that's got, that gives you a flamer, that gives you a missile launcher. The Deathclaw gives you a minigun and power armor. The game gives you the tools you need to take care of a serious altercation. Even though most players will have the tools they need to deal with 3 simultaneous significant altercations. And what that creates is a game that you're never hurting for resources. Fallout 4, you'll have a surplus of everything. And the things you don't have a surplus of, you will have plenty of, with just one sweep through a dungeon. Or if you need aluminum, just go to the Institute and rob them. All of those little junk pieces contain plastic and or aluminum. None of them are flagged as, owned. So you can literally just walk in, sweep entire shelves of hundreds of their weird little, applicator thingies. And then, you have a whole bunch of aluminum now. And a whole bunch of plastic. Same with the Institute weapons. That's a tremendous source of those materials. 76 is only ever so slightly better in that regard. But you're still hoarding. You're not picking stuff up because it will be useful later. You're picking stuff up because it might be useful later. You end up with, Allen wrenches, gerbil feeders, toilet seats, electric heaters, trash compactors, juice extractors, terawatts, and water meters. And that's just how the game is. And 76 is only better in that regard because you have to keep repairing your weapons and repairing your armor, a system that should have been in Fallout 4. But, you're never hurting for resources, and you're never needing to make these kind of bold moves. Fallout 1 and 2, you need to make bold moves, but you can't be stupid about them. A bold move in those games will be like, I have to go up there to shoot this guy in the eye because that will deal way more damage than anything I can deal from this range. But I have to be very precise about how I do that. Because if I don't do it right, if I run out of action points by the time I get there, I can't, fire my gun. And thus I can then take a meat shot from his shotgun and bleed out and die. Fallouts 1 and 2 are a lot like that. Fallouts 3 and New Vegas, combat-wise, are similar to that, but because you have so many reserves, and because, you can duck behind cover and kind of pop up and duck back, because you have VATS, and, action points are not a scarce commodity that, you're constantly using, it's no big deal. Combat in that game is no big deal. And you never really put in a precarious situation unless you're fighting, Broken Steel's infamous bullet sponge monstrosities. And then Fallout 4, even worse, honestly. Action points are used in other places. But because the combat system is that much more robust, you're aiming down sights and, you can get behind cover better. It's just, at that point, an FPS. And you don't have to make these risky moves. You can kind of pop up, line up your sights, and keep ducking up and down behind cover to kind of line them up correctly, and then just go in for the kill. You don't need to get closer to an opponent. There is a skill for melee players where you just teleport between targets in VATS. If there's, because normally you can't land a blow in VATS when there's 2 or 3 meters between you and the opponent. But there's a skill that allows you to increase that to 20 meters. And kind of just you can even look up at a balcony, see an opponent, go into VATS, hit attack, and then now you're up there. It's a system that, Todd's 3 famous words, it just works. 76 is just as bad, but at the very least, it's slightly better. I feel like the combat system, kind of the weapon degradation system in 76 is good. But that, that doesn't replace or even supplant the fact that the actual gameplay in 76 isn't good. And all of these games, Bethesda's whole run so far has kind of tainted the, do or die circumstances surrounding Fallout. And now it's kind of just do. You don't need to be, quick thinking or not even quick thinking. You don't need to be thorough in your plans. If you make careless plans in Fallout 1 or 2, you're toast. You can make careless plans in 3 and 4. And as long as they don't involve an explosive device, you're fine. And even if they do use an explosive device, if you're in power armor, and you can pretty much use power armor the entire game because you keep getting fusion cores in 4, it's no big deal. You can easily build a set of power armor. The set that I ended the game with, I think, was the T-51. And I had that up to like T-51D or E. And it was like 300 combined, explosive or physical damage resistance. And like 200 rad resistance or 300 rad resistance. And a whole bunch of energy weapon resistance. It was never a big deal. I was never in any actual danger when I was in power armor. And it's supposed to come at the cost of, fusion cores are, hard to come by. But you don't use them when fast traveling. The game keeps, at a certain point in the game, like once you reach the Institute, it just starts throwing them out like candy. You'll find a fusion core, like, in every single dungeon. And there'll be a guy in power armor in every single, major encounter. You find some raiders, one of them will be in raider power armor. Fusion cores just become like the treasure at the end of a dungeon now. You get to, there's a puzzle. There's a bunch of like cages in Boston. And you hack the terminal on the cage and open it, and your reward is a set of crappy power armor, but with an intact fusion core. So, they don't have that same sort of, I don't want to use these, but I need to use these, otherwise I'm dead, so I have to keep using them, feeling that, every item in Fallouts 1 and 2 have. And that's kind of the Gestalt. It's much more like numbers and mathematics based, but, you don't make these you don't have to make budgeting decisions, like resource allocation and budgeting decisions when you play Fallouts 3, 4 in New Vegas, unless you're playing at super crazy high difficulty. And even then, it's still very easy to build a surplus. Hardcore mode in New Vegas, I would argue, helps. Because, your bullets have weight. And, the different calibers weigh different amounts. So, 10 44 Magnum rounds and 10, even 357, weigh different amounts. So you constantly have to keep deciding, is a heavier bullet that does more damage worth it if I can't carry as much? Or do I want smaller, lighter bullets like 22 LR and 9mm that I can carry a ton of in that same weight? What about shotguns? What about energy weapons? So that kind of helps New Vegas. And plus you're always using healing items because not only do they heal your health, but they can also, quench your thirst or, help your hunger or, keep you from having to go to bed early. And with that in mind, that's how New Vegas kind of, curbs that sort of Gestalt degradation. Is it just requires you to use more materials because they will do different things. Or it'll ask you to, prioritize. You don't have much carry weight. What are you carrying? And Sawyer's Mod even helps that too. But I think that's kind of the big thing with Gestalt. And I don't make that explicitly clear in the video, and I really should have. So I'm sorry. This is Fallout Leftovers. And this is actually about something I meant to cover in Fallout in Analysis. I wrote myself a note. I was going to talk about it when I got to Fallout 4. Never did. And it's about kind of the racism and imperialism present in how the game talks about ghouls, and really mutants in general. So for context, the difference between ghouls and super mutants in Fallout, which I would hope you would understand if you've watched Fallout Analysis, because that kind of implies you've played the Fallouts. But to give a quick rundown, Super mutants were created either in Vault 87 out of sheer laughs. I don't exactly know why. It was like an enclave experiment. Or on the West Coast, they were created by the Master for his army, Unity. He was trying to create a master race and failed because his master race could not reproduce. That's on him. And ghouls are, for the most part, they are pre-war citizens who've been exposed to radiation, and that has kind of deteriorated their skin and their mind and things. Actually, in the West Coast lore, ghouls are created through a very specific process. It's a very, not controlled, but a very specific burst of exposure to radiation over certain periods of time. And things have to go exactly right to produce a non-feral ghoul. If those steps fail, however, the person just either dies of radiation poisoning or becomes a feral ghoul. In Fallout 4, and a little bit in 3, but mostly 4, it's just whatever. And New Vegas kind of just had to accept that as canon, which I can tell was taken very disdainfully. So that's really the big difference between mutants and ghouls. And how this relates to Fallout 4 specifically is in the treatment of feral and non-feral ghouls. Bethesda's Fallouts have a very hard time kind of presenting mutants and ghouls as a product of fucked up fascist America. Because that's what they are. When you fight a feral ghoul, there should be this kind of internal conflict of, this was somebody trying to survive this hellscape, and they've been treated unfairly. You know, the privileged got to sit in fortified bunkers. The even more privileged among them sat in an oil rig, or in the Whitetail bunker in 76, and never had to know that the world was going to hell around them. And of course, there's things like Big Mountain, where they were blissfully, willfully ignorant of the end of the world. That's not what we're talking about. The people who become ghouls were dealt a very, very bad hand in life. They're just trying to survive. And in previous Fallouts, there's places like Necropolis, where they're kind of pushed and prodded to live into. Necropolis kind of is this shorthand for a low-income, decimated neighborhood. Like Flint, Michigan, for example. I don't want to use their name in that way, because that's mean to the people of Flint. But it's, in both cases, the government failing to take care of the citizens of the United States. Catastrophically failing them, and then just leaving them to die. Fortunately for us, the people of Flint, Michigan are getting help from regular old Americans like you or me. Or if you're not an American, then regular old Americans like me. You know, folks like us can help the people of Flint, Michigan. There's no helping the ghouls of Necropolis at this point. And that's kind of the critique in Necropolis. How this relates to Fallout 4 specifically is in the fact that on the East Coast, most people tolerate the nice ghouls. The ghouls who don't attack. The ghouls who don't speak up. Because there are ghouls who are unhappy with their situation and try to make a name for themselves. Tenpenny Tower is a perfect example in Fallout 3. And Tenpenny Tower has this issue where if you let the ghouls have their own settlement for themselves, the feral ghouls will destroy the non-feral ones, and there'll be nothing left. And it kind of becomes this... It eerily parallels, you know, the stories of blockbusting and gentrification and kind of, you know, lowering property values. You know, the story always goes... It's a terribly racist story, I'm very sorry. But, you know, the story is nice black communities don't lower property values, but the ones that do must not be nice then. Which, we're just people! We're just people at the end of the day. That's really what it boils down to. Like, be nice to people, because we're all people, and we're all stuck in this all together. The exception is, of course, billionaires and the people that Fallout is directly criticizing within the scope of this Fallout analysis video. So there's already that kind of, like, innate racism built into how Bethesda and the East Coast lore treats mutants and ghouls. But Fallout 4 takes it a step further, especially if you join the Minutemen, because you get Radiant quests to go clear an area of ghouls. And the game always kind of tells you, you know, it's fine, they're feral, they're just regular enemies. No, you're going into a place like an imperialist. You're purging this, you know, unclean, uncouth population to then put in your settlers. And it really is gentrification, and even more than that, it's kind of imperialist. There is this uncanny imperialist nature to Fallout 4. And no matter what faction you side with, you can't escape it. You know, the Minuteman is purging raiders and ghouls from areas to move in settlers and workers. And it kind of plays into, you know, this story of, you know, heroic soldiers going into an unclean, savage place and installing democracy into it. Not helped by the fact that the main player character, Nate, is actually a U.S. soldier. And a quite wealthy one at that, because he can afford a home. The home is full of plastic. And plastic is kind of shorthand in the Fallout world for fucking loaded. You know, you've got this nice plastic house, this nice upper-class neighborhood with next to no military presence. And that same character then has to go and purge these unclean, savage people from an area to install what is the post-apocalyptic equivalent of an upper class. You know, people who can put clothes on. They can grow their own food, pump their own water. They can, you know, fend for themselves. They are a self-sustaining community, even if there's only like 3 of them. They are completely self-sustaining, and not many settlements can say that about themselves. So, and this is most notable with the Minutemen, because you're playing the role of kind of this post-apocalyptic American trooper. It's the NCR all over again. And it's the worst parts of the NCR, but the Minutemen is depicted as the most kind faction. And they really don't have downsides. You know, they don't have a fatal flaw. And again, that is just... Between that and Liberty Prime, like, with Fallout 4, Bethesda's, you know, cheeky, kind of nationalist, kind of just patriotic, hard-on for America is just in full display. And at this point, enough people should be saying, please put that away. It's not nice to have that here. That's not why we're here. It's one of the many frustrating things with Fallout 4. With Fallout 3, it could be argued that Bethesda didn't know the world of Fallout well enough. You know, they kind of just picked 2 factions out of a hat, kind of just bashed them against each other like 2 G.I. Joes, and at the end of the day, a giant communist-hating nuke-chucking robot blows them up, the bad guys up, and you go, yay, we defeated fascism. Wait. But with Fallout 4, it's so viscerally obvious that Bethesda knows what they're doing. For crying out loud, they mention a date. They actually mention when, like, an NCR treaty gets signed into law by date, and the only way to find that date is to really go fucking digging in Fallout 2. They know this world. They're just trying to spin it so they can sell it to a broader demographic. Because an anti-war, anti-imperialist, anti-consumerist series like Fallout is a tough sell to conservative American gamers. And there is a problem with, far-right conservatism breaking into gaming and computer technology scenes. Steve Bannon owned a World of Warcraft gold farm. and he and Milo Yiannopoulos, or whatever the heck his name is, partnered together to try to spread this, borderline fascist rhetoric in gamer circles, and it's worked. And now Bethesda is having to sell to a radicalized group, and if you tell them America's not the good guys, they flip. You can go online and find reviews for Spec Ops The Line is really the one that's coming to mind immediately. There's reviews for Spec Ops The Line that are mad that it's anti-American propaganda. It's not. There is not just this binary good propaganda, bad propaganda. It should just be. It should just be. That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. This topic got away from me. I am very sorry. This was just about ghouls, and the fact that a bunch of Radiant quests just ask you to kill ghouls and not think about it. But it kind of got away from me and became kind of this, again, critique of, the impending right-wing hyper-conservatism breaking into game scenes that big AAA companies just don't want to do anything about. For the love of God, please do something about it, because it's going to be a problem. It's currently a problem. We have game circles that are borderline fascist, and they repeat fascist or white supremacist talking points. And the game scene and the right-wing hyper-conservative scene are kind of just blending together, and that's terrifying. If the last 4 years haven't made you more willing to share and collaborate and build with your fellow human beings and work to push each other to bigger and better things, if it's pushed you to become more stingy and imperialist and gatekeepery, I'm sorry, you are probably on the wrong side of history, but it's not too late to change. That's the end of this, because this is becoming very quickly... I'm going to have to disable comments. Yeah, this one got away from me. This is Fallout Leftovers. I've definitely changed the intro sequence on some of these parts and not on others. I am once again on the road, and I'm talking about a hypothetical post-game for Fallout New Vegas. New Vegas is a game that, while it's great, I am not going to say it's bad, and I really don't think there's any bad parts to it. All of its issues stem from the fact that it's obviously incomplete. And the biggest one is after Hoover Dam, it rolls credits and takes forever. But then it just pops up this text box that's like, congratulations, you beat New Vegas, thanks for playing. And while it's funny as shit that this, dearly beloved video game just gives you a congratulation, you're winner page for completing it, it really does need a post-game. And I honestly think some of the more thematic elements of New Vegas would be more obvious with a post-game. As it currently stands, there really is no reason to side with House, NCR, or Caesar. Really, the only valid ending is the Yes Man ending. One, because it's way shorter than all the other endings. And two, all of these other characters have obvious flaws, but Yes Man's obvious flaw is that he is blindly loyal to you. And after Battle of Hoover Dam, he admits that he's going to get an OS upgrade that'll prevent what you did to Benny from happening to you. So nobody can steal Yesman away from you. Mr. House, the NCR, and even Caesar's Legion all provide Vegas, though, one thing that you as courier cannot: stability. Mr. House, the NCR, and the Legion have loads of resources, both manpower and money and other things too, that allow them to take care of the Mojave Wasteland to a certain extent, to varying extents, rather. Caesar's Legion will brutalize most of the civilization within Vegas, but what they leave has stability. It is Caesar's Legion. The NCR is able to gentrify towns like Good Springs and Novak, I don't think those are the exact towns that are mentioned in their ending, but they gentrify some towns of New Vegas, which produces a ton of trade in the Mojave. And Mr. House is just a literal billionaire who will dump money into Vegas and the Hoover Dam because there's nothing else to spend it on. All of those characters and all of those factions really have very obvious glaring flaws. And that makes the wild card ending look not just reasonable by comparison, but favorable by comparison. So, take out Mr. House, send Aaron Kimball running with his tail between his legs, and make Caesar look like a fool, like the Birdman, and have to throw himself into fucking the Grand Canyon. But you don't have stability. Smaller towns like Good Springs will stay small towns. Novak will get destroyed no matter what you do. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that in Fallout in Analysis. Forgive me for not knowing every single line in Fallout in Analysis. It's 30,000 words. But the big one is, I believe it's the Old Mormon Fort, where the followers of Apocalypse are. As an independent Vegas, you cannot support them. And their clinic quickly just becomes like a drug rehabilitation center and just gets overloaded with junkies, which causes the followers to collapse as a group. Under the other factions, or at the very least the NCR and maybe Mr. House, they can thrive. They can be a medical clinic, almost like a world-class medical clinic compared to everything else, for the Mojave, because they'll have the money and the resources to support the people of the Mojave. And independent Vegas doesn't have that ability, because you're just one guy or one gal, and you are not an entire economy. Let's disregard the fact that if you steal all the gold from the Sierra Madre, you literally are the economy. Nobody is going to actually do that. And what you buy and sell doesn't have a tangible effect on the world unless you dump it back out into the world. So, there's that. In a New Vegas postgame, all this stuff wouldn't just be text on a screen. It would be tangible. You would play it. If you work for Mr. House or the NCR, you might have quests to go gentrify these areas. You might have to go into Good Springs and tell Easy Pete to move out or cough up more money. You might have to install NCR members to bump up the property value. In an independent Vegas, Yesman might tell you that the Old Mormon Fort needs some help, but no matter what you do in that quest, you cannot help them. And over time, problems would start adding up, and while you are completely free, the Mojave becomes this sort of libertarian paradise of a sorts. And while libertarian paradise could mean, the modern libertarian, baby should drive and dogs should have guns, no rules, it can also just mean a collectivist mindset. A group of people working together to better each other, to better their society. And I think a good karma independent Vegas would become that, but there will be casualties. And Old Mormon Fort and a couple of the other areas in New Vegas are those casualties. And if you had to play New Vegas' epilogue, I think that would become way more obvious, and I think the breakdown of who picks what ending would be a little more mixed, instead of being like 60 to 80% independent Vegas. And one last note, while I'm talking New Vegas, I need to mention it somewhere. While I was writing this video, Microsoft bought ZeniMax Media, which owns Bethesda. Microsoft has owned In Exile Entertainment, who makes the Wasteland series, for probably 6-7 years. I want to say they bought them just after Wasteland 2. And yes, that is the same Wasteland as 1988's Wasteland. And they also own Obsidian Entertainment, the developers of New Vegas, and The Outer Worlds. So now Microsoft owns the entire lineage of 1988's Wasteland, 1997's Fallout, and 2018's The Outer Worlds. Which is insane. One company owns not just the original, but its spiritual successor, and that spiritual successor's spiritual successor. a lot of people saw this as, oh, now we can get New Vegas 2. How do you top New Vegas? Where do you go from there? I mean, you could set it in some other part of the Fallout world. You know, you could set it in the Divide, or you could set it east of the Colorado River. You could set it in Texas, Oklahoma, sure, whatever. But, first of all, that's dumb. I hate thinking of bigger companies scooping up smaller companies like Krill like that. All those people who went, oh, the Xenomorph Queen's a Disney princess now, make me so fucking sick. No, it's a $1 billion corporation just bought like a borderline $1 billion corporation. And somehow, even though that company is loaded, they've become Krill to these like mega corporations, and it's terrifying. It's legitimately terrifying. But my bigger issue is I don't think New Vegas needs a sequel. I think Bethesda just needs to learn like the themes of their own series and use them. I think they need to distance themselves from the quasi-Republican propaganda Fallout has become, because, you know, those themes of war dehumanizes people and American exceptionalism will destroy the earth are kind of getting muddled in this whole, like, well, China wasn't good either. Which isn't the point. The series isn't about China. China is a stand-in for whatever country the United States might be at war at. China in the Fallout world, at least in the DOS games, was kind of a stand-in for just whatever country the US might be at war with in 2077. It could have been Russia or the Soviet Union. God forbid the Soviet Union survives like 100 years. Jesus. 150? That'd be terrifying. But it could be Korea, Australia, Algiers. It doesn't matter. The actual country doesn't matter. What does matter is that it was a Cold War that turned hot because of American exceptionalism and the desire to develop the military instead of deal with the domestic problems. You know, enough guns just keeps hunger away, I guess. It's about the fact that fascist-like power vacuums don't care about the people inside of them. It's about power, not about people. And if Bethesda just, like, acknowledges that and builds upon that, I think they could make something. I mean, at the very least, at the end of the day, what they would have made if they do follow that sort of agenda is they've made a Wolfenstein game that's 50s sci-fi B-movie with an open world. And to some extent, that's fine. It's fine. I would rather that than what they're doing. And I would rather that than Bethesda just hires Obsidian to make another game so they don't have to deal with the world. If Bethesda really doesn't understand Fallout to that degree, to the point where they need to buy out another company, or outsource the games to another company pretty much indefinitely, they might as well sell Fallout. And they're not going to do that because it makes a whack load of money. Anyways, that's my spiel on a New Vegas Postgame and the ZeniMax buyout. It's frustrating. New Vegas is like this close to being, you know, one of the best games ever, in my opinion. And what needs to bridge that gap would have just been like 6 more months in the oven. I'm certain there's mods to do that sort of stuff, like add the post game, add in the cut NCR $500 bill, and the Legion Platinum coin. Make Freeside, the Vegas Strip, and the rest of the Mojave Desert all one area instead of like 4. There's definitely mods for that sort of stuff, but that's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the game just needed more time, but Bethesda was too worried that it was going to run into Skyrim time And so they cut the game off just before Skyrim came out because they wanted to make sure Skyrim was their biggest release ever. And it was. I don't know if New Vegas getting DLC at the same time as Skyrim coming out would have killed sales. I don't think it would have. This is Fallout Leftovers, and we are talking the thumbnail, also the art in the credits and such. Once again, that was made by our friend Dan. Please go check out Dan's work at, I believe it's aporoid.tumblr.com. It's on his commission page, so I can go ahead and say it. I paid $75 for that art. Hopefully I got the money out, but if I didn't get my money's worth from Fallout and Analysis, I got my money's worth out of Let's Talk About Payday 2, so I'm fine with that. Dan does amazing work. All of his stuff is vector art. He does typically lineless vector art, and it always looks really cool. It always reminds me of like 90s CG, or cel-shaded CG, or even just like things like A Scanner Darkly. It's got such a cool vibe to it. And this one in particular was a lot more interesting than Let's Talk About Payday 2's thumbnail art, because in that one, I'm kind of just facing forward, but this is a more dynamic angle. It's like 3/4. And also, kudos to him for the Pip-Boy. That thing looks awesome. That is specifically the Pip-Boy 2000 Mark IV from Fallout 76. I own the model kit. It is not good. Do not recommend the model kit. They have pre-assembled ones, but they're really expensive. I hate owning that thing, and I had to actually do a bunch of repairs every single time I took pictures of it, because just sitting in storage in its little case, it was falling apart. Again, terrible kit. I hate that thing. But Dan makes it look awesome. So, just amazing. The original idea I had for the thumbnail kind of had some parody with Let's Talk About Payday 2's thumbnail. I was going to be facing the camera once again, but this time I was kind of backed up against an overturned log. There was a nuke behind me, and I'm kind of just staring at the viewer. But this time, instead of kind of that it's all over look that was on the Payday 2 thumbnail, it's kind of a more nothing matters. And I'm kind of quietly bitter about that, but I'm kind of accepting it sort of look. Because that's how I feel about Fallout. You know, it really doesn't matter. At this point, it's just an M-rated funny sci-fi shooter. And that's sad. And that makes me very upset because I care very deeply about the world of Fallout. And I think it has very important messages for us, especially now, more than ever. More than it did in the 90s, probably. Evidenced by the fact that I've talked about the game for 3-something hours between this and an analysis. But it's something I do really care about. But it's kind of just getting squandered. And I'm slowly beginning to accept that that's just the world I live in. Dan didn't really like that initial idea. And we had some back and forths about what he wanted. One of the things Dan suggested was a more combat-oriented design. He asked me what my favorite weapons in the Fallout series are, and I had to give it to him straight. It's the 45 auto pistol from New Vegas, which is just the 1911. There is the battle rifle from New Vegas, which is the Garand, and the Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas version of the Gauss rifle. That thing just looks cool. Dan ultimately went with the 1911, and it's appeared in all of the various versions of the thumbnail that we've workshopped since. But he originally wanted a more action-esque pose, kind of like the James Bond GoldenEye 007 box art, where he's holding the gun off to one side, but backed up against a door frame, and there'd be something in the door frame, maybe a super mutant or a death claw. I felt that would be better for just a straight up review of one of the Fallout games, but I'm not gonna buy a $75 thumbnail for every video I make, because I'll never make any money off the channel. Simply put, I would have to do a video a month with that sort of a thumbnail, and I'd only make like $20 a month. That's ridiculous. So I'm not doing that. It just didn't really have the impact I was hoping for a thumbnail of this caliber, for a video of this caliber. So we took that one to the drawing board again pretty quick. Some time passed. This was probably the very beginning of October. We were talking about it again, and Dan was thinking... Actually, no, there was one before that. Between the one that I'm about ready to talk about and the more actionized one, that second one, there was kind of a lapse of communication. And I guess I made it sound like what I was looking for is more of a nothing matters, so why bother sort of look. So Dan sketched very, very quickly. It was just like me in a lawn chair sipping something while the bomb's going off, like in beyond the foreground. So the camera's kind of like a meter from me and like 15, 20, 30 meters from the nuke. So like you could see it like reflecting in the glasses and across the bottle. Funny. And if everything went right, then I did my own take on that sort of a prompt for the Fallout Leftovers thumbnail. That's my art. Hi, I'm not an artist. I thought it was funny, but it's not the direction I want. For this, it's fine, because this is unscripted. It's bad. But for Fallout and analysis, wasn't what I wanted. So then we get to the third look. Dan was thinking 3/4. So we finally came to an agreement about the tone of the thumbnail. It's kind of this bitter anger, but it's kind of buried under this veneer of, like, there's really nothing I can do about it. Weary and tired and frustrated. And there's the nuke. And, you know, there's nothing you can do to save yourself. But god damn it, does it feel bad to be out here right now. So I did kind of a really cheap sketch. It was a very low resolution sketch. I think it was like 192 by 108. I sent it to Dan. I did a colored sketch that was a little different, and then I did a black and white sketch too. That was really the sketchiest of them all. Just because there were different things that we had to kind of worked on this final thumbnail a bit at a time. Like, I nailed down, like, what I wanted to look like color-wise, and then I nailed down what I wanted it to look like posing and framing-wise, and then kind of what I was looking for with me involved. And then Dan finally got to draw on it. He sent me a work in progress that, first of all, is amazing. This is obviously a work in progress that you're looking at, and art is done in layers, and things don't look great until the whole piece is put together, because that's how art is. But I love that he just drew an orange box and labeled it gun. I love it. I truly thought that was hilarious. And that was because he didn't have any good shots of kind of the underside of a 1911. So I had to go into H3VR and take like 12 screenshots of the underside of the 1911s. I think it was like 6 with the 1911 A1 and 6 with just the regular 1911. And then that brings us to the final thumbnail. It's great. Once again, a huge thank you to Dan for your hard work on not only just the thumbnail, but for everything. For showing up to streams, for showing up to the Discord and talking with people. You know, as always, like, thank you, Dan, for your continued support in all forms. It is great having somebody like you work on a project like this. And I feel like you gave Let's Talk About Payday 2 a lot of its identity, and I hope people feel the same about Fallout and Analysis and your art. This is Fallout Leftovers, and we are talking not Fallout, we are talking Skyrim. I truly think Skyrim was the most important game Bethesda's ever made, because it really told them that they can streamline games to improve their sales. And we saw that with Skyrim. They made the leveling up procedure just pick 10 of a stat you want and then grab a perk. And if you want to learn shouts, you have to go fight dragons. I mean, that's like leveled loot, and there's modifiers you can get for your weapons and everything. But it wasn't this cumbersome experience like Fallout 3 or New Vegas or Oblivion. I don't think I like that direction, because it works for Skyrim, because at least you have the skills, so you can still make the characters feel unique. Fallout 4, it's next to impossible to make a character that feels fine. Now, would I go as far as to say that introducing an organic skill level up system like the Elder Scrolls is to Fallout 4 would have made Fallout 4 better? Yes, absolutely. If they took that type of a system and just plunked it straight into Fallout 4, it'd be great. And honestly, you would have skills. And I think Fallout really needs skills. I don't think perks do it well enough. But then also, people could probably argue that would make Skyrim and Fallout 4 too similar. Not necessarily. I mean, the map design is entirely different in both games. Fallout 4 has a lot more urban environments and kind of tighter spaces, and Skyrim is much more open and pastoral. Tonally, the games are completely different. Skyrim is... I don't think I actually know what Skyrim's about thematically. It's kind of about betrayal, because there's the Civil War, and you can play both sides and kind of screw one over better than the other. Your actions kind of change the world of Skyrim, and then you have the Blades, who straight up tell you to kill the coolest character in Skyrim, and nobody kills that character because, one, they're voiced by Charles Martinet, and two, they're a friendly fucking dragon. Why would you kill them? With that in mind, I do believe that the two games are different enough. I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if gameplay-wise the two games are so similar, because every other way they are incredibly different. So, if I do have a gun stat, but I get it by aiming down the sights and landing headshots on people. If I do have a science stat, and I get that by playing the hacking minigame. If I do have, a survival stat, and that levels up by cooking and eating food, it's fine. And I think at the end of the day, it's just a way better system than just perks for everything. I will say, though, I am very glad that Fallout 4 was nowhere near as successful as Skyrim, because I think that would have... First of all, that almost probably would have doomed Bethesda, because then they'd have to live up to those expectations for their next game, and they won't. But then, secondly, they're going to take it a step too far and streamline a game too much to the point where it's just like a campaign FPS or campaign adventure game, but with perks. It'll essentially be Far Cry 3. They will have made Far Cry 3, but as a Fallout or an Elder Scrolls, and then people would have been upset. And they would have every right to be upset. I don't think that's what anybody wants. I do think there has to be a little bit of complication, but I don't think the older games are better in that regard. I don't think Fallout 1 or 2, gameplay-wise, is the best the series has to offer. It is a clunky, slow system, and it does take a lot of getting used to. And you kind of have to know its quirks and oddities, otherwise you're screwed. So too complex isn't good, because then it makes the game unapproachable, but too streamlined, I feel, makes the games very samey. I do think 3 and New Vegas were the best of both, but I think they could also be a bit better. I don't think that's the perfect Bethesda RPG. I think it's a good one in terms of the base mechanics. New Vegas more than 3, but that is kind of the system that I think they should springboard from with their next Fallout. If they do one that's even worth playing. This is Fallout Leftovers, and this is kind of just to talk about Brotherhood of Steel and Tactics, Brotherhood of Steel. Yes, there are two Fallout games named Brotherhood of Steel. They both came out like one after the other, but they're radically different, and they're both not great. I talk a little bit about Tactics in the analysis. For folks who don't know, that was actually, I don't think, made by Black Isle or Interplay. I'm fairly certain that was a third party. I know it's pretty much just a Fallout skin on a pre-existing Tactics game. I know that much. And it makes sense that it was made by a third party, because there are a lot of bizarre details in that game. It is the only Fallout game where you can play as a super mutant. It was the only Fallout game with PvP up until Nuclear Winter came out for 76. And it is the only game where the Deathclaws have hair, because I guess chameleons discovered mammalian genetics? I don't know. That one's weird. It also just kind of depicts Chicago as getting blown to fuck up. It is absolutely amazing. Can we put that image on the screen? Thank you. But Tactics is fine. For what it's worth, Tactics could have been worse. And it's still part of the Fallout anthology. Bethesda still sells it on Steam and other places. And when you buy the Fallout anthology little nuke container thing, it's in there. So they don't hate it. But Brotherhood of Steel, the hack and slash console game, they do hate. And that one they have plenty of reason to hate it. Essentially, from what I understand, Interplay was asked to make a more actionized Fallout title, so Fallout could compete with, the likes of Diablo and Half-Life. So they made this top-down hack and slash. It kind of retreads the plot of the first Fallout. Or at the very least, you meet the protagonist from Fallout 1, and you meet Harold and his friend Bob. I believe that game also introduces vaults called, the Secret Vault and the Hidden Vault. Really inspired names. But no, Fallout Brotherhood of Steel is not a good game. I'm going to be completely blunt, it is not a good game. It's not a fun hack and slash, first of all. There's way more fun hack and slashes out there in the world. Even at the time. I mean, Diablo 2 existed. So, rest in peace, Fallout. But for fans of Fallout, this is not what you want. Fans of Fallout, even as of 1998, 1999, 2000, loved the world, the lore, and the characters. There's next to no actual lore. It's kind of just set in the middle of nowhere. And it's way more Mad Maxy than anything. Even to a degree beyond the DOS Fallouts, which are very Mad Max. They really don't have much of that Buck Rogers, Jetsons, Atom Punk aesthetic to them. They kind of just exist. But for people who like the atmosphere and aesthetic of Fallout, Brotherhood of Steel also fails because one of your healing items is just straight up a piss joke. There's just an item, I think it's just called Weird Nuka-Cola, and it's a mysterious dark yellow liquid in a bottle. No surprise, it's piss. Real clever, fellas. Funny joke. But then just also, the game features Slipknot and other out of context metal for the combat music, because it's trying to appeal to a mainstream audience who doesn't care for its 50s meets Mad Max aesthetic. So they kind of just went balls to the wall. and broke pretty much every convention they could. So, it's obviously not a good game. And it's because it was kind of engineered to appeal to a mass market. The sad thing is, Interplay had a second chance, and they were like this close to taking it. So while they were working on Van Buren, they were also, what was it? They were working on a second Fallout Tactics. I believe Fallout Tactics 2 was set to be in Florida. And the whole point of the game was kind of subverting this kind of like nature versus technology theme that a lot of other media utilize. You know, it's kind of the point of the Lorax, Sonic the Hedgehog. You want to go later in time? Mother 3 is probably like the biggest single game that kind of attacks that theme and kind of tears into it. I love Mother 3. Conceptually, I love Sonic the Hedgehog. And there's other games too. Minecraft kind of indirectly touches on it if you play for long enough. The point behind Tactics 2 was that some group in Florida attempted to use a GEC. They used it incorrectly, and they ended up producing all of this mutant plant life that is now just decimating Florida. And you go down to Florida and you deal with it. So, you know, the win state would be you eradicate the plant life from Florida and you turn it back into just a regular old irradiated desert. And it's a cool inversion on the trope, and I think that's where Bethesda also got the idea that the GEC is kind of just a magical device. I guess Fallout 3 and 76 are sending up Tactics 2. I guess. But they already don't consider Tactics 1 completely canon. So I don't know why they would consider any amount of Tactics 2 canon, especially because Tactics 2 never came out. That game was canceled in favor of focusing on Van Buren, another CRPG, and also a Brotherhood of Steel sequel. Because again, they were trying to target the console player demographic. And the smartest thing that ever happened at all of Interplay's final days is they actually welded the two games together. Actually, I believe Van Buren was canceled in favor of Brotherhood of Steel 2. So they took the elements of the elements of Van Buren and they put them in Brotherhood of Steel 2. The game was set to take place in Arizona, or around that area, and you would meet groups that were set to appear in Van Buren, like the Ciphers. And I believe, what is it called? Boulder Dome? I believe that was even set to appear in Brotherhood of Steel 2. So it was effectively an actionized Van Buren. And that even manifests in the gameplay because Brotherhood of Steel 2 was also set to include skills and perks and special stats. So the game would have been, kind of just like a modern Bethesda Fallout. It was a super actionized take on the CRPG format. In Bethesda's case, they went for an FPS, and I think that worked out well. But I don't dislike the idea of Fallout as a hack and slash. I just don't think it would have sold at all, because they would still be going up against Diablo 2. And if they tried to do a Brotherhood of Steel reboot today, they would still be going up against Diablo 2, because Diablo 2 is just that much of a long runner. They could also have to compete with Diablo 3 and Minecraft Dungeons and Diablo 4. But come on, 10,000 people still regularly active in Diablo 2 servers, even still. It's insane. Those are numbers we only really see with games like Counter-Strike anymore. Games that are, that long running with that active of a player base. And I guess, hypothetically speaking, that's like Minecraft is as old now as Half-Life 1 was when Minecraft first launched. So, what other games are kind of becoming these long-running, perennial franchises? I don't know. But I do at least think Brotherhood of Steel 2, if it had come out, would have gotten mixed to positive reviews instead of kind of just very, very mixed, weighing towards negative. Because you find reviews for that game that are between 1 out of 10 and 6 out of 10. I feel like Brotherhood of Steel 2 would have set somewhere between 5 and 7.5, in my humble opinion, if it was going to kind of weld together the two gameplay styles to make something cohesive. And I think it could have worked. I don't think it would have saved Interplay. I don't think it would have determined anything about the future of Fallout. And I'm just going to tack this one right on at the end. Brief Fallout leftovers about Fallout 3. I just learned this today. For reference, this is a week out from Fallout and Analysis's launch. Troika Games tried to bid to be the developer on Fallout 3. Troika Games was the studio that Tim Kaine and Leonard Boyarsky founded. So they almost got to make Fallout 3. Almost exactly like how they had envisioned with Van Buren. But unfortunately, Bethesda bid out way more than Troika Games could put in. So they got the rights to Fallout 3. And then they decided, well, we're just going to own Fallout now. It's a shame. I kind of hope, in a weird way, that at some point in Fallout's life, it just goes full Sonic the Hedgehog, and they're just like, yeah, you know what, screw it. We're just gonna do whatever. We're gonna make Van Buren. We're gonna make it a CRPG again. And it'll be set pretty much just where New Vegas was set. And it's just gonna, I guess, take place, I don't know, somewhere during Mr. House's coma, so it doesn't interfere with any amount of Fallout. Sure. Who knows? I think it'd be neat to get this kind of bizarro New Vegas and have it just be called Fallout 3, the post-nuclear role-playing game. Or maybe they just call it Fallout Van Buren. It wasn't called Fallout Van Buren. Van Buren was just the name, its code name at Interplay. I'm aware of that. But, come on. Fallout Van Buren is such a cool name. And the logo they made for Fallout 3 was kind of cool, too. I don't know, that's it. Are y'all getting sick of me recording these while I'm driving? I'm getting sick of it. My throat needs a break. This is Fallout Leftovers, and I already know I don't have a point or a solution recording this one, but a whole lot of people argue back and forth over speech. Does setting your speech to 100 just immediately, break every conversation, every encounter? Would a percent chance make speech a more useful skill? Because it is really all or nothing in New Vegas, and in other games too, 1 and 2. Whereas in 3 and 4, it's centered around percentages. And often you can't get 100%. The only way to guarantee you pass every speech check in Fallout 4 is to have a charisma stat of 11. Otherwise, there is a chance you will just straight up fail a dialogue option, despite saying, the correct thing. I'm of the opinion that New Vegas does it well, but I think Fallout 1 and 2 do it better. Fallouts 1 and 2 don't tell you which checks you can pass and which ones you will fail. In fact, it barely tells you that there are checks. you actually have to take the time to read the dialogue and consider the character. I think that's a really cool system. It's very frustrating as somebody used to the New Vegas system, where it's like, oh, here's your speech check. Yeah, you have 100 points and you need 30 to tell this guy, wait, don't shoot, I have a bomb. I don't think that's actually one of the checks. There's a check in Helios 1, you can be like, don't worry, I'm NCR, I'm just, an undercover officer or whatever. And they're just like, okay, I believe you. I like New Vegas giving you ones that are obviously, poorly thought out when you're going to fail the check. Like I say you raise that, I say you raise the bounty, otherwise you're chip out of luck. And Mr. House is like, was that an attempt at a joke? I honestly can't tell. That's fun. So I like the failed checks, and I like pointing out the checks, but I think just having you read the checks put before you, I think that works better. Maybe what speech could become is, it's a stat where it kind of helps you figure out what's a better choice. Like, you might keep a list of notes on an NPC, and the higher your, we'll call it a conversation stat, because that's kind of what it's about to become. But the higher that stat, the more quickly that notes section fills up, and the more detailed notes it contains. So now if you're talking to a ghoul who, he's talking about the good old days before the war, you start getting more background info on that guy, filling up your notes section, the higher your conversation stat. And say you need to pass a very important check with him, and sometimes the dialogue doesn't make that very clear. A higher conversation stat might tint important, dialogue options or checks a different color. And the higher your stat, the more extreme that color difference. So, a check that will make him, stand down and not attack you, that might be, that might start turning a bluish color. A check that makes him angry at another NPC and instigates a fight, that might turn a reddish color. So you still have to read the dialogue and make the right choices, but increasing that stat helps you as a player kind of figure out the right choices earlier. And also because then you are keeping better notes with the conversation stat, you might be able to then use that in special checks when you talk to other NPCs. Like if an NPC tells you, this guy dodged the draft at the NCR and claimed that, he had a broken leg. But we saw him, running around a week ago, just in circles. When you go to that guy, because you have that note, and because you have that note, you would then be able to grill him on it. So then it kind of becomes this game of, the higher the stat, the more information you glean from NPC dialogue that you can then use in other checks to get more information, to then kind of just build up this big repertoire of notes that you can then use against the region you're in to kind of set story straight. It's a lot more reading heavy than, speech 100. But that would solve, it's not random. There is no randomization here. And just having the stat maxed out, you can still make mistakes. You have to be astute as well. The one issue with this system that I'm already seeing is that on repeat playthroughs, this isn't a very useful stat. Because you already know what speech checks to take, usually, most of the time, if you're replaying stuff you already played before. And you can keep that skill very low if there is ways to get that information elsewhere. And you would really hope there are ways to get that information elsewhere, because otherwise you lock content behind having a high conversation skill. So, an NPC might, you might be able to convince an NPC with information you learned from one of their friends, or you might, hack into a terminal and find that information, and then you can use that against them. And then on a repeat playthrough, why grill the NPC for information when you could just skip straight to the terminal, hack it, read through the note you need, back out of the terminal, go find that NPC, and talk to him about it. This is a difficult game design decision. I get it. Like, you still want there to be some challenge to the conversation portion, but you don't want it to be, left up to a roll of the dice. Even if it's a 90% chance, there's a 10% chance that you're going to screw it up. And then what happens when you get that 10% chance? But at the same time, you want it to be an important skill, but you don't want it to be a necessary skill. I think this conversation stat system would work, because it kind of works like lockpicking in a way. It speeds up parts of the game. This door is locked. I can go find the key, or I can just lockpick it and walk through. Oh, I need to, talk to this NPC about specific information, but I'm not too sure about the information. Well, I can either, go through this big chain of events, or with a high conversation stat, I can find, I can use the information I already have, and it helps me determine how I should talk to this NPC to get the information I need, saving me a whole bunch of steps. It works. I think it's one of those things where, as much as it would work in theory, it needs to be executed. Like, we need to see what that actually looks like. And I don't have the patience or the talent or even the ability to mod either Creation Engine or Gamebryo to make this system work, to see how well it works. Because, keep in mind, with this notes system, now you need to keep metadata on what every line of dialogue every NPC says has in relation to the rest of the world. And that is frustrating. And that is, again, another really good critique on, this, made up on the fly while driving speech skill. Your writing staff now has 10 times the amount of work, because now they need to, build a system of notes. What does this line of dialogue mean in relation to characters you've already met or places you've already been? And then also a bunch of game design decisions. Do you make the notes accessible for the player? How do you break them down if you do? Do you break it down by character and area? Do you break it down based on who said it or what others said about the character? And then also, if you don't make it accessible, how do the notes that you obtain reflect how the game is played? If a character says something like, I think I left my Tommy gun over at, Bramford Station. Does Bramford Station on your Pip-Boy, glow to let you know that there is treasure there waiting to be found? Or, if a super mutant is like, these people moved into Vault 99. I don't like them. They scare me. Does Vault 99 now, is that a different color on the Pip-Boy? Because, that's a dungeon, and it's got some sort of high-level or otherwise terrifying monsters inside of it. If a character says something like, you want to pick up every single toy car you see, those bad boys contain loads of screws. Now, do you highlight toy cars? Do you highlight every toy car in the map and be like, this contains screws? Or do you just make it where when you need screws, it lists places that might contain a lot of toy cars? Does it list, Alfredson's toy store as, a place to go? How do you make this sort of a system work? And I think at the end of the day, it's just a whole lot of work, and I don't really know if it's, I don't know if it's worth the effort, to some regard. And I think that is indeed a completely valid criticism of the system I just came up with. And again, I said at the very beginning, I don't have a point or a 100% airtight solution. And I don't think there is an airtight solution. I think just the entire act of talking to people being a skill, I think is pushing it a little much. I think if it was related entirely on your other checks, I think speech might work then. Maybe you then make, speech logic or reasoning. and then you build up your reasoning skill, and you can use that to discern, like, hey, I don't know, like maybe your logic skill determines how long skill books last for, or determines how wasteful you are in repairing or building weaponry, or something else. And then in lieu of a speech check, you use a logic check against, like Atlanteus, and be like, hey, bro, your plan makes no sense. You're going to spread yourselves too thin, and you're going to crumble like the NCR did. I don't know. And again, like, I walked into this not having a completely airtight solution. We could be arguing about this for decades. A million of us can come up with a million different solutions, and each of them will have a problem. And I think at the end of the day, it's just one of those things where if they do bring back skills, either exclude speech or find some other use for speech. Or find a way to make it so speech isn't just, click this option to win. Because that's kind of what it was in New Vegas. If you like this video and you'd like to see more, I'd recommend subscribing. Patreon and social media links are in the description.